Hello and welcome to this week's Bible in the News. In 2005, the Israeli Knesset passed what was called the Disengagement Law, which ordered the removal of 21 Israeli settlements and the eviction of the settlement's 8,000 inhabitants from their homes in the Gaza Strip and banned any settlers moving there in the future. But what the law also ordered was the removal of settlements in the northern West Bank, which was also brought into force in 2005, but was hardly heard of due to being overshadowed by the much larger disengagement of Gaza. However, this year, Israel's new government has amended the disengagement law so that Israelis are no longer prevented from returning to dwell in these areas of the West Bank, while making no change to the law in respect to the disengagement from the Gaza Strip. Now, when we consider Bible prophecy concerning the land of Israel, it is clear that the future for the West Bank has always been very different from that of the Gaza Strip. Throughout Ezekiel, we are repeatedly told that it would be God's people, Israel, dwelling on the mountains of Israel at the end times, not a Palestinian state, not a hostile people against Israel, for the people of Israel would be dwelling safely, without walls, bars or gates. We're told that in Ezekiel 38 verse 11. Ezekiel 38 verse 8, Gog comes against God's people who are dwelling upon the mountains of Israel, and they shall dwell safely, all of them. Now the mountains of Israel refer to the spine of mountains that go from north to south in Israel, much of what is known as the West Bank today. However, the prophecies regarding the area of the Gaza Strip is very different, particularly when we look at the Armageddon prophecy as written in Joel chapter 3. Joel chapter 3, going in at verse 1 for context. For behold, in those days and at that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, I will also gather all nations, and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage, whom they have scattered among the nations, and parted my land. And they have cast lots for my people, and have given a boy for a harlot, and sold a girl for wine that they might drink. Verse 4, And what have ye to do with me, O Tyre and Zidon, and all the coasts of Palestine? Will ye render me a recompense? And if ye recompense me, swiftly and speedily will I return your recompense upon your own head. Now the original Hebrew word for recompense has the idea of paying back for something. And so what we find here is that in the area of Tyre and Zidon, and an area known as the coasts of Palestine, there will be a group of people who at the time of Christ's return will be looking to pay back for something, who feel they've been treated unjustly. And God will be ready at that time to turn that payback upon their own head. Now Tyre and Zidon have been part of Lebanon since the time of Israel's birth, and Hezbollah are a terrorist group who are stationed there and have much influence in the Lebanese government. While the coast of Palestine, or the Gaza Strip, is an area that less than 20 years ago was a territory controlled by Israel, in a similar way to how the West Bank is today. And so what we see is the future of the Gaza Strip is very different to that of the West Bank, because we should expect to see the Gaza Strip inhabited by people who do not love Israel, who feel they have been mistreated, which is exactly what we see today. The West Bank, on the other hand, is very different. We expect to see it become more Israeli and less Palestinian, until it becomes, as described in Ezekiel 38, a place inhabited by God's people, who have been gathered from many nations. And so what we see in this week's news is that the Israeli Defense Minister is signing this order to repeal the ban on Jews returning to the northern West Bank, which is another step, yet another step of many, making the West Bank and Gaza Strip take different directions. And this goes back really all the way to 1967. In 1967, Israel took the West Bank and Gaza Strip during the Six-Day War at the same time. The legal status held by both those territories was identical. Those living in those areas were under the same legal framework. Both these areas were then settled by Israelis. In 1993, the Oslo Accords were signed. Again, treating these areas the same. Some parts were given to the Palestinian Authority, while some areas remained in Israeli control, and settlements remained in both regions. It wasn't until less than 20 years ago, in 2005, that we saw the first signs of the different futures that these places held. We had the disengagement law that came into force, which removed all settlements in the Gaza Strip, while the settlements in the West Bank continued to flourish. Then, within the next couple of years after the disengagement, there was the Palestinian Civil War, when Hamas seized control of the Gaza Strip, while Fatah remained in control of the Palestinian areas in the West Bank, again putting a division between these areas. Since Israel's disengagement of Gaza in 2005, there has been no new Israeli settlements in Gaza. There have been no settlers in Gaza. While, meanwhile, in the West Bank, Israel's settler population has doubled from 250,000 to now over 500,000. Israel's new government is further removing the restrictions on Israeli settlements in the West Bank, and so the population there is likely to grow at an even faster rate than it has before. And so as we see the divergence of these two areas continuing, both going towards the different futures that they have in that prophetical snapshot, showing the prophecies of the Lord's return are coming to pass. And so, as the time goes on, we look to see this continue. We look to see the Gaza Strip continue to be inhabited by those people who are against Israel, who do not love Israel. Or we expect to see the West Bank to become more Israeli, with larger numbers of settlers in that area, until they can dwell in peace and safety. Join us again next week for another episode of Bible in the News. This has been Paul Barnes joining you.